There are 5 or 6 rolling stone tombs visible in Israel today with the stone still in place. Now, why do I say 5 or 6? If they're known, if they've been excavated, can't you figure out if it's 5 or 6? That's a problem. I've seen 5 of them. There is a 6th one that is recorded in the literature in the mid-1800s. And nobody has so far been able to discover where on earth that thing is. So whether it got robbed out or buried underneath the construction, which of course is illegal today, or just buried under trash or something, we don't know where the 6th one is. But 5 of them have the stone still in place. And that's important because we've got a lot of broken ones and different time periods, a lot of similar kinds of evidence, but all 5 of the clear ones have a wall in front that holds the stone in there. None of them, for a rolling stone tomb of this sort, has just a trough or an open space where the stone would lean up against the door. This happens to be one of the most famous ones. This is the Herod family tomb. Herod himself was buried at the Herodian, south of Jerusalem, south of Bethlehem. But this is in Jerusalem, would have been easily visible. It's on the hill west of the Old City, easily visible from the Old City, from Herod's palace, and very well preserved. It once upon a time had a nice big stone pyramid on top of it, huge cut stone. That has been robbed away by stone cutters and built into constructions over the centuries. But this beautiful little chamber, and this is not the significant part of the tomb, this is kind of a side chamber for perhaps a child or something. The main part of the tomb complex is pretty badly damaged. This particular hole has an interesting story. During World War I, the British had their military headquarters in the King David Hotel, which is just up above this picture. Literally, the shadow of the King David Hotel will fall on this site late in the afternoon. And during that time, the Irgun, which was the Jewish resistance movement that was dedicated to fighting Hitler as if there were no British and fighting the British as if there was no Hitler. Because the British had restricted immigration, made life extremely difficult for Jewish survivors before the war and during the war and after the war, disallowed Jewish people to come to the Holy Land. They had to come in illegally in darkness, jump off of boats out in the harbor and hope to swim to shore. During that time, there was a clandestine radio operating under the Irgun in this cave, literally in the shadow of the British military headquarters, and they couldn't figure out where on earth that radio broadcast kept coming from. Notice the wall in front and some of the other structure. The top part is probably cut away, but you can clearly see the nice big stone, and that stone would probably weigh upwards of 800 pounds. It just needs to be big enough to be able to roll into the hole. But that kind of helps you understand how easily a wax seal could be placed on something like this. And it also kind of illustrates how difficult it would be, for instance, for Mary or the others that were the first ones that tombed to even consider rolling the stone away. They were going to need help because of the great weight. And of course, if that was in any way in a depression, all the harder then to get it back out. So it was a very secure system with crowbars and things like that. You could probably move the stone. At least a couple men working on it might be able to roll it back out of the way. Now, it was interesting as I started on this message. This is unique to Matthew. None of the other Gospels tell these details of the burial of Jesus Christ. Just about everything we've seen so far is supplemented in the synoptics and or in John, but Matthew is the only one that has this little piece of information at the end of chapter 27. And of course, there's always going to be some critic somewhere that's going to invent some kind of a bad theory about why it's there. Matthew was trying to pad his case for the resurrection or whatnot. I think that there is some pretty unique information in this little piece that helps us to understand the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. And I want to close tonight with, why on earth is this important? Why is the burial important? Now, we're going to have a fun time getting there because of the short nature and the sparse details. I'm going to be able to take some extra time to give you a little bit more of the historical archaeological background to tombs and to burial practices here, some of which we see in this text. But let's begin by reading it in Matthew chapter 27, picking it up at verse 62. Now on the next day, the day after the preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered together with Pilate and said, "Sir, we remember that when he was still alive, that deceiver said, 'After 3 days I am to rise again.' Therefore, give orders for the grave to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise, his disciples may come and steal him away and say to the people, 'He has risen from the dead.' And the last deception will be worse than the first." Pilate said to them, "You have a guard. Go. Make it as secure as you know how." I think there was a lot of irony dripping in his voice at that point. And they went and made the grave secure. And along with the guard, they set a seal on the stone. So I've given you kind of a 3-point outline here, which seems to be the necessary way to preach, for me anyway. Starting with the predicament of the priests in those first 2 verses. It's so easy for us to read this and not pick up on the great problem that they were facing. Here they are in one of the highest holy days of the year. This is one of the pilgrim festivals, Passover. They've had their Seder. And they are now into what is known as the Feast of Unleavened Bread for 7 days after Passover. They have a continuing holiday. Children love it. This is spring break. This is when you get out of school. This is when Dad doesn't have to go to work, or at least not full days the whole time. This is a great time of family festival, getting together, having friends over, lots of good food. No leaven, but you can make some pretty neat stuff just with matzah meal too. And in this day, and especially these people, the priests, they were, of course, very concerned about ritual impurity. They actually haven't come through the higher holy day yet. That's the next day. They've come through the day of preparation, the Sabbath, and now they've come up to the day after that, and look at what they're doing. They're going in to talk to a Gentile. We're not told where they go. That could be very significant. But they're going to end up going into a grave. That's something priests don't do, period. It's just not done. You are allowed to attend a grave of your wife or immediate children or your parents. That's it. No cousins, no other near relatives, and certainly not anybody else. And these high priests have a real dilemma here, but they've got to get it taken care of. They've got to do it now, or it's going to get away from them. So what is it that they remembered here on this occasion? I put down my first suggestion. We're sunk if we don't keep Rome involved in this. This is going to get away from us. We've got to keep Pilate engaged. Now, that probably wasn't real hard to do because Pilate could have his head off if some big problem, tumult, riot started in Jerusalem. He's brought in lots of extra soldiers for the occasion. He's keeping extra special guard every nook and cranny of Jerusalem so that some sort of a revolt doesn't spring up somewhere. This Jesus thing has really been touch and go, and it appears that it's successfully taken care of now. He's safely in the tomb. We don't have to worry about this anymore. Now, we don't know for sure what all was going through Pilate's head. I'm going to suggest that he had his own major doubts, perhaps verging on the point of some form of belief. And the priests, rather interestingly here, they apparently have some kind of doubts almost verging on the point of belief. They seem to be more believing than the disciples at this point. We remember what this guy said. The disciples seem to have forgotten that and run away. So they're gathered together with Pilate. The location is not stated for us here. We've got a couple of good possibilities, both of which are problematic. The Praetorium would be a big problem because it's a Gentile headquarters. And we're in the middle of the holy days. If they were to go into a Gentile residence, a Gentile headquarters, they would be ceremonially impure and therefore unable to participate in all the events of the Passover and the unleavened bread. It's not likely that they would invite him to the Sanhedrin. That's almost as bad the opposite direction, to bring a Gentile into the middle of their highest court. So we don't know for sure where they met. I'm going to guess it was like on a kind of a dark corner somewhere or down the alley. You know, they somehow got him to come out to talk to them, and they were refrained from getting too close and maybe touching him or something. But they risk ritual defilement by even meeting with him on this occasion. They could pretty well count on his involvement because it was also in his better interest to keep this thing under cover and not let it get out of hand. So at the very least, they had to get his permission in order to act, in order to do something. And interestingly, how they address him, sir. Now, that's just a normal form of address, respectful. But I'm going to suggest that it's a little bit subservient in this case. First of all, the word that's used there is Kyrie, which is the word for Lord. The very word that's used for Jesus all the way through the Gospels, and they've rejected the Lord, capital L, the Lord of Lords, and now they're calling this Gentile Lord, Sir. And they have decided that they're going to have to come up with some kind of a backup plan. If anything goes wrong, they better have something in their back pocket to pull out in order to explain things to the crowds. Remember, from the very start, they've been afraid of the response of the people. One of the gospel accounts say the common people gladly followed him, and he had thousands that followed him. A week ago, the crowds had been acclaiming him as the one who comes in the name of the Lord, a clear messianic title, Son of David. And some of those same crowds were no doubt part of the ones that had been influenced by the chief priest now just hours before to call for his crucifixion. This was a holiday Shabbat following the weekly Shabbat. So you've got the day of a holiday is a cessation of work, a Sabbath, a Shabbat. And then you've got the normal weekly Saturday Shabbat. So they waited until after the day of preparation, and they risked this defilement now by going to him in the middle of, or at the beginning of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. During that time, everybody would have been at home. I mean, everybody would have been, if not in their own house in Jerusalem, if they had come down from Galilee or somewhere, they would be with family members or perhaps some kind of a rented villa where they could gather together with their extended family. And it's a relaxed time. They're talking, they're reminiscing, they're thinking about all the fun stuff and the recent events, and that probably would have caused some interesting discussions in some of those home situations. And that's something that the chief priest really didn't want the people doing too much of, thinking about it, and thinking about the things that they had just seen and heard, and beginning to wonder and mull things over. So they saw that quick action here was going to be essential. And I've suggested a third response here and what they remembered. They start by saying, we remember. I think there's a lot of irony in that, the fact that these guys, of all people, are remembering when the disciples seem to have forgotten. In fact, they didn't seem to get it at all up to this point, not until after the resurrection. And on many occasions, 3 of them here in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus had clearly said to his disciples, I'm going to Jerusalem, I'm going to die, and he always followed that up with, and 3 days later, I'm going to rise from the dead. Where exactly would the Pharisees and the chief priests have heard of that? Well, it no doubt got around through a lot of the people, but we do have an answer to that in Matthew chapter 12. If you can remember back when Jesus was there in Galilee in chapter 12, verses 38 through 40, then some of the scribes and Pharisees said to him, Teacher, we want to see a sign from you. That's kind of a strange situation. He is the sign, the ultimate sign, God in the flesh. But they wanted to see some kind of a miracle. But he answered and said to them, An evil and adulterous generation craves for a sign, yet no sign will be given to it, but the sign of Jonah the prophet. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. They heard it directly from his lips, that he would spend 3 days dead and then come back out of the earth alive. So he has told them, and now they quote that phrase, after 3 days, I am going to rise. The actual time that he was in the tomb is something like 36 hours. And that has led people to question or doubt, for instance, a Friday crucifixion. Some will suggest a Thursday. Some will go as far back as Wednesday. And it's an attempt to try to accommodate those words I just read, 3 days and 3 nights. But if you stop and think about it, unless the prediction and the death takes place right at the turnover between a day and a night, you can't possibly get 3 days and 3 nights and still have him arise after dawn on Sunday morning. You can't fit 3 days and 3 nights into any sequencing there. And it's not even necessary to go that route because it's a clear Jewish practice that any portion of the day is called that day. So he's in the grave a portion of Friday, all of Saturday, and a portion of Sunday. And that fulfills the 3 days prediction. Jonah was indeed 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, but that's not the point that's being stressed in the quotation that he recited there. It's the 3 days in the grave. So he says, they quote him, after 3 days I am to rise again. The murderers, in other words, took Jesus' words more seriously than did his very disciples. So that leads them then to, as they gather with Pilate, to make a proposal. Verse 64, Therefore give orders for the grave to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise his disciples may come and steal him away and say to the people, He has risen from the dead. And the last deception will be worse than the first. So what is it that they requested here? First of all, they want him to guard the grave. Give orders, they say. Now remember, Pilate had just very recently given orders for him to be scourged and taken out for crucifixion. He had also, even more recently, given orders for Joseph of Arimathea to be able to take down the body from the cross and give it a burial. So they went to the right place to try to get that order, but that's not what they got, is it? Instead of getting the guard posted, notice his words here. He says, you have a guard. And I think that's very emphatic. Not everybody has come to the same conclusion that I have on that, and I never really thought of it quite that way before. I always kind of assumed that this was a Roman guard that went out there, and the Roman soldiers were the ones that put the seal on the tomb, and the Roman soldiers were the ones that reported to Pilate afterwards. No doubt all those things came to Pilate, but it's very emphatic here, you have a guard, and it says they went out and posted the guard. And you've got another reference to that also in chapter 28, verse 11. Some of the guard came into the city and reported to the chief priests all that had happened. Why would they do that if they are under Pilate's jurisdiction? If they're Roman soldiers, they would forget the Jews and let's go tell our commander what we think might have happened. Now, lest I sound too dogmatic on that point, look at verse 14. You're still there in Matthew 28. Verse 14 says, if some of this should come to the governor's ears, we, the Jewish priests here, will win him over and keep you out of trouble. So that would sound again like maybe it is a Roman guard. It certainly is some kind of a combined solution here. Pilate gives them permission. That's necessary. They post a guard. A seal is set, and when that seal is broken, somebody has to respond for it. We don't have any record. Of course, that would be an argument from silence, but we don't have any record that the Roman soldiers were executed as a result of this. We do have that kind of a record elsewhere in the book of Acts, and that was a common thing. If you lost one of your prisoners or whatever your charge was, you suffered the penalty for it. And for a soldier to lose a criminal, dead or alive, could be instant death at the hands of Rome. They say, give orders so that it can be secure until the third day. And the reason they give is in case his disciples come and steal him away. Now, that is a rumor that they circulated hereafter. And I think that's why Matthew incorporates it here in the text. After the resurrection, in order to try to cover, they circulate that rumor. But there's any number of difficulties with that sort of an explanation. I'm sure most of you have probably been to a Easter sunrise service or an Easter sermon somewhere where somebody marched you through all the different kinds of theories to account for his disappearance from the tomb, or to account for the empty tomb afterwards. One of them is a swoon theory, that he actually on the cross just swooned and it looked like he was dead and they buried him, but in the coolness of the grave he revived and he rolled that 800-pound stone away and walked out. Unlikely, especially with the loss of blood and everything else. If he had not expired, which he did, the Bible tells us that, there's no way that he would have gained strength during that time in the tomb and been able to come out victoriously. And of course, that would have been really easy then. Just show us where he is. Or if the disciples stole the body, start killing off disciples until you get down to the bottom of that story and find the body. Actually, he showed the body on multiple occasions to hundreds of people. Over the next 50 days, there were some 11 different appearances to groups of various sizes. So roughly every 3 or 4 days, he's showing up again somewhere, and people are seeing him. And that message is going to get around very quickly. The other thing was, in this part, diffuse the deception here. They specifically say the last deception is going to be worse than the first. The first being his claim to be Messiah. Or worse yet, God. Remember how the high priest said, I adjure you by the living God, are you the Son of God? And Jesus said, yes, I am. And that was, in their thinking, a severe deception of the people. The truth of the matter is these people were the ones that were deceived and deceiving in not following their own scriptures, not evaluating his message and his works. And I think they're having some pretty serious second doubts about this time. What if he does come back? And they say the real deception, or the second deception, would be worse than the first if his body disappeared and they circulated the story that he had actually raised from the dead. Now let me take a little diversion here for a minute and talk a little bit about those rolling stone tombs and lead that into the discussion about the garden tomb, so-called, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. People are very divided on the identification of the place of Jesus' burial. Now, he obviously can't have been buried in two places. So can we sort through some of the evidence and come up with a better answer for that? I need to tell you, you need to leave your emotions at the door and some of your, I wish it was that way thinking, because you go to visit the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and it's not a happy experience. It's what my colleague in Israel, Bill Schlegel, used to call a bells and smells church. Now, it's the holiest site in all of Christendom. Every Christian, some perhaps more than others, would like to see where was Jesus buried. And if you read the gospel accounts carefully, more than that, the place where he was crucified, nearby was a garden in which was a tomb. All of these things are really very close together. That's why it's possible to put it underneath one church. Now, what a church. It's got multiple domes. It's got rooms on the sides that one of the tour guide books says it looks like a bunch of barnacles. And it is. The history of the last 2,000 years is recorded in those rooms and walls and chapels and everything that goes on there. There's 7 different large C Christian churches, denominations, groups that have some kind of concern in that building. And they have a very complicated, let me just show you where it is. There's the Gordon's Calvary or Garden Tomb area, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is today inside the city wall, but at the time of the first century was not, at the time of Jesus' crucifixion. Those 7 denominations fight to the point of blood regularly. At least twice while we were living there, blood was shed in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and many times it stopped short of that. Lots of fist fights, knives are drawn, all kinds of confusion. I was there one time with the Master's College Chorale, and they wanted to sing. I mean, how bad can that be in the Holy Sepulchre? And of course, it's better than singing in the bathtub when you're in a nice rotunda and the sound is just going to fill everything. And they had just taken down all the scaffolding inside the rotunda, and Paul Plew got the choir to stand all the way around. I think it was 55 voice choir or something like that, 50. And then he started to do one of these little things kind of off to the side. And the song that they were singing is "You Are the Light," because the light just filtering down through there is so beautiful. And just before that had happened, the Greek Orthodox were over here with all their mumbo-jumbo and chanting and making a lot of noise, because the Armenians were over here chanting and making noise and trying to drown out each other. Just one of those typical squabbles. So here's this beautiful Protestant choir, and boy, instantly we were the focus of all attention. And who are you? Why are you here? You can't do this. Get out of here. No way. So now I happen to be the guide, and I've got to answer for what's going on in there. And so I said, well, wait a minute. We are singing about Christ, the one that we love, that died in this place. Why can that be wrong? And they knew they couldn't argue with that, but they could still argue. And so they end up saying, okay, there's a little chapel down in the basement, the place supposedly where Queen Helena, the mother of Constantine, found the wood of the true cross. And you can go down there. Nobody has control of that. You can sing down there. Well, it couldn't have been better. Here we are in a smaller space where all the sound just reverberated right up through the whole building, and they sang their song down there, and nobody could complain. Well, they still complained, as they always do in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So, come the 1860s, the Protestants were late on the scene, and they didn't have these holy places like the Catholics and the Greek Orthodox and the Egyptian Coptics and the Russian Orthodox and the Armenians and everybody else had. So what are we going to do? Well, there was an American family, and you know them, Horatio and Anna Spafford, had moved to Israel after the Great Chicago Fire, and they lost most of their properties and goods. They decided to take their family to Europe and kind of rest for a while, get their lives back together. And of course, on that sea voyage, the ship was struck. Horatio had gone back to solve a last-minute deal and said, "I'll catch up with you in England." And only the mother survived. All the children were perished. And that's when Horatio then on his trip overseas wrote that song, "It Is Well With My Soul." Well, they decided not to stay in Europe, and they moved to Jerusalem and opened what is still there, known as the American Colony. The original location, though, now it's outside the old city, just a little bit north of this view. Their original location, though, was just on the city wall and just inside the city wall near the Damascus Gate. A family friend was a man by the name of General Charles Gordon, a famous British military man. And one day he was there visiting a family, sitting outside his room up on this rooftop, looking out over the view, and he thought he saw what definitely looked like a skull right over there in the rocks. And so he started on a journey that produced not just the tomb of Jesus, but also the burial place of Adam, and a whole bunch of other crazy stuff. Right near this, the Garden Tomb Association was able to purchase a garden space. They've made it an absolutely delightful spot in Jerusalem. Clean, quiet, the birds are singing. You feel like you're from all the grub and everything the grubby stuff and everything that's going on in the old city all the time. And it's just a beautiful place to sit down, and it's really a fun place to go to an Easter sunrise service. I did it every time I was in Jerusalem for Easter. It's just not the right place. So I want to try to show you why not. Here's a photograph that was taken back in the 1860s, and what looks like a skull there, you can kind of pick your own holes and figure it out for yourself. It is iffy. But the two big ones up near the top that are supposedly the eye sockets are actually Turkish period cisterns. And the rock face had broken down, revealing those holes in the very poor quality stone there. In other words, it didn't look like that at all in the time of Jesus. This is only like 350 years ago that the visibility there changed so much. But, some people don't worry about details like that. And so Charles Gordon drew up his map. You can see where he put Skull Hill up there at the top. The esophagus on this skeleton is actually an underground tunnel that leads down into what is known as Solomon's stone quarries. And that's represented by the chest cavity there, this huge underground cavity, a big hole under there. And it's got a lot of nooks and crannies that go off. You don't want to get lost underground in there. It's open to the public during certain hours. Notice where the pelvis is. On top of the Temple Mount. Now the Mosque of Omar, so this is a statement against the Muslims, but it's equally a statement against the Jewish belief that that's where the temple once stood. The knees are on Dung Gate, and the heel is on David's tomb. And all of that had for him prophetic and otherwise symbolism and typology. Very, very questionable, not just in theology, but likewise in archaeology. And as I told you, if you read the rest of the book, you'll find all kinds of other discoveries in the immediate Jerusalem area. So I think he needed to get himself a different devotional book while it was up there on the roof, because this one doesn't seem to be giving very good results. Now, that spot, of course, through the years led to the identification, supposedly, of where the cross once stood. And you'll notice up on top, there are some stone pillars and things there. And if you've got good eyes, right there in the middle, there's a black iron gate or fence around one of them. That happened in I think it was 1869-70, when D.L. Moody, who was the pastor of the Spaffords back in Chicago in the day. D.L. Moody came to town, visited the family, and he wanted to preach while he was in Jerusalem. And he thought, boy, that looks like a bully pulpit up there. So he got up on top of that stone box where his voice could ring out over the area here. We're back by the city wall, and the main street kind of goes right down through there. So he used that as a preaching point. Somebody should have warned him that that's actually not a pulpit. That is a Muslim sheikh's tomb. And he was standing, desecrating the cemetery and that tomb. So that's why the iron great gate is around there. And actually the whole cemetery is closed off. No Protestants, no non-Muslims can enter that space anymore since the 1860s. Right nearby is the beautiful little garden, and upon further digging, they found an empty tomb. Now that's significant. That's interesting. It's outside the city wall. It's near this rocky outcropping. It's along a main road, and the Romans would have looked for a good public place where the crowds would be going by. Maybe this is it. And they actually found, just above the doorway, a little bit to the left here, right up in this area, it looks like, you have to use your imagination, but it looks like a stone or an anchor carved into the stone, which was one of the early Christian symbols. And according to the theorists, this was like the courtyard or the nave, and the church that was once on this site, according to them, celebrated the burial place of Jesus. Now, even if you don't have another candidate, I'd say that that's pretty unlikely that the most sacred place in all of Christendom got forgotten for 1,860 years, and some little Byzantine chapel was all they could find on the site. You would expect, if it's the burial place of the Lord, that there'd be some kind of a cathedral, some kind of a big chapel, and multiple rooms and things on the sides, which is exactly what you do have at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So we haven't proved that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is the right spot. I think we've fairly proven that this is not the right spot. So why do I go? Well, it's nice. That's not a good argument, but it is so much easier to go there and kind of clean things out of your mind and your head and just read the Scriptures and consider a quiet spot, a garden with a tomb in it. So I do this for emotional, spiritual desire. But when my head is in gear, I'm thinking, I know good and well this is not the place. So let me prove that a little bit more to you. In front of this is this stone channel, which they say is where the rolling stone rolled. But you got some serious problems with that. First of all, if you can almost see it on this, but notice right here, the outer edge is at an angle, exactly the opposite of what you'd want. If the stone is in there, you don't want it falling out on somebody or unable to lift it back up. Remember, every one of the known Rolling Stone tombs has a wall out there to keep it from getting away. Furthermore, look at where this channel comes all the way back here, and it's quite a steep slope on it. And if you ever got the stone to some point in the low point, you're never going to roll it all the way back up. And notice on the other end, it keeps going and it disappears in that bush. Actually, it doesn't disappear. It goes on past and leads over into a huge cistern in this garden. This is a rain collection channel for running the water and during the rainy season to fill the cistern over there. It has nothing to do with the Rolling Stone back then or any other time since. Yes, it's an empty tomb, and that's very interesting, but of course 2,000 years later there's lots of empty tombs or nothing more than a bit of dust in them or something. And tomb robbers have gotten into just about every tomb multiple times and taken anything that might have been of value in there long ago. But the problem is the kind of tomb. You see on the left side, which is taken to be the location of Jesus' body, there's actually a little wall there. What you're looking at is like an inset coffin. And there used to be a lid on the top. Likewise at the back, less visible, and a similar structure over on the right with this centerpiece, a little bit to the right of center, which is the passageway. A person can go in, lay the body out on the slab, and prepare it, or final preparations for burial there. This is actually something of what is called an Old Testament style tomb. And I'm not sure why that one came up again, so let me see what's happening. Okay, hold that thought for just a minute about the tomb, and I'll come back to it. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, at the time of Jesus, of course there was no church there, it was a stony outcropping of limestone outside the city wall. And that limestone was, as far as they were digging out the stone for the quarry, was good, but there was a big chunk of it that was very poor quality. And so they dug around it, leaving that piece. And because it was soft, it eroded, and the light color of the limestone is what gave it the idea of a skull, a cranium there, a stony outcropping. And a few weeks ago, I showed you a little bit of that detail in one of the messages that where I talked about Calvary. Now, the Holy Sepulchre is this elaborate building. It's a labyrinth. The only public entrance is right down here. You come in through the stone pavement area and come through the gate, which is mostly hidden from view there. The biggest gray dome there is the rotunda where the Holy Sepulchre is located. The little white one to the right is on the top of Calvary. So all of those things are very close together in there. The square tower was a bell tower that was added during the time. The base of it is actually from Constantine. The top of it is from the time of the Crusaders. If you do a cutaway, you can see some of the elements in there. Here's the stone entryway. So our last angle was from over there. You come inside. If you go up the steps, you come up here to Calvary, all encased in marble and incense and burners and everything else. This is supposedly the stone slab where Jesus' body was wrapped in the shroud after it was taken down from the cross. And any time of the night or day, you'll find a lot of Catholics there pouring water onto the stone slab, sopping it up with a napkin or something, and then wiping their own face or squeezing it into a bottle so they can take that holy water back to home wherever it is. So there's always a lot of commotion and things going on right there. If you keep going a little farther, though, you come into the rotunda area, and that is going to be really hard to figure out as any kind of a Rolling Stone tomb, isn't it? I'll show you in a minute what happened, but remember, this is 2,000 years ago. Lots of stuff chopped away, even by souvenir hunters, but then covered over by the religious authorities in control with slabs of marble and built up like this to what we see today. Before I leave that, I want you to take a look at one other detail over here. Out the back side, you come over into this little chapel, which is one of the chapels that is not under any kind of permanent control of another denomination. It was burned by an internal fire in the 1890s, and nobody ever really fixed it up since then. So people like us can come and go all the time in there, and once in a while a religious group will have it's really tiny. I mean, the whole thing is that big. But the significant thing is in the back corner are the remains of tombs. It's been given the traditional name of the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. The idea being he wasn't laid to final rest in the tomb. After Jesus had been there, he just dug another little corner out, and other family members were buried there close by. It would have been part of the family tomb complex. Now, that kind of shows you the lineup of here's that cistern where we got this thing. Here is Calvary, and you can see it's just not much more than a bump there. Ended up with marble over the top of it. And then the rotunda, and that would be the place where the body was laid. So look at that top one for just a minute. You can see there's a slope of a hill coming down. And after the quarrying was stopped, somebody dug a hole, Joseph of Arimathea, presumably, or family members, and then created a little antechamber and a burial spot in there. And so over the centuries, almost all of that was hacked away, leaving just kind of a stone shell with the original tomb still part of the internal structure there, and then all the other stuff started being built on top. The original circular building there didn't even have a dome. It was open air. And the first dome over it was a wooden dome with gold plating on it. Today, of course, it's a beautiful, elaborate structure. Depends on your definition of beautiful, I guess. This, by the way, friends, is the one place on earth where the UN has been successful in anything. Now, I'm revealing some of my politics there, I know, but everywhere they go, everywhere, they create bigger messes. They never solve problems. In this case, they were able to work out an agreement between those 7 denominations on who gets to clean what, when. So if you scrub this floor, that gives you some kind of a claim to that. If you change this light bulb, you have some kind of a claim to that space. And the UN was able to work out an amicable solution to who has charge of what and when in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. There's the central piece, and if you look up, you can see that now a very beautiful dome. For 15 years, it was all covered with scaffolding and drop cloths and things like that. You couldn't see any light or certainly no beauty in there. Now it's much more open and much more pleasant. There's the little corner in the back where identified, maybe not accurately, as Joseph of Arimathea's actual tomb. It's part of the family complex in there. And here is what I skipped earlier, the idea of an Israelite 4-room house. You see where you get the 4 rooms. That's what their normal house looked like. And that's what their eternal abode, or the place where they went after death, looked like. They carved their tombs to look similar to what their houses were like. So you've got the slab. Number 1 in this picture would be the one that is identified, I think wrongly, there at the Garden Tomb as the place where Jesus' body laid. And you can see number 4 is where you walk in, lay the bodies on the slabs. There's several interesting details, though, about those kinds of tombs. First of all, this is part of a much larger tomb complex right there beside. In fact, there's only 6 feet separating this tomb, the Garden Tomb, from a huge tomb complex. This is one of 3 segments of it where, I was going to say hundreds, perhaps a couple hundred people eventually were buried. It was a huge cemetery. And to say that this one lonely tomb, which was found first and by itself, is somehow separate from the rest, you can't sustain that. Furthermore, this is an Old Testament burial style. And remember, we saw this morning, Joseph laid him in a new tomb. He wasn't cutting a tomb in a 600 or 800 year old style. It was a new tomb. And we know what those new tombs look like. The old ones, this happens to be one that apparently was after a bus accident or something. They had a multiple burial spot. It's unusual, but you do have slabs like that. And in this case, perhaps a plague or something, most of the family died all at once. So we got some students to lay out there and show you. And notice underneath the slab, usually the one inside to the right, is the one that there's a hole, which is a bone repository, and it's full of bones. Because as each body then is disarticulated, the flesh decays, the bones are put together down in the repository. And that's at least part of what is referred to in Old Testament sometimes of being gathered unto your fathers. You quite literally were bones mixed together with the bones of the rest of your family in a family tomb like that. New Testament times are very different. They didn't have a bone repository. They started to create a little shelf on the back called an arcosolia. And the bones at first were just kept in separate piles on the arcosolia. Of course, after a while, you get too many and the piles don't stay together and things start to get mixed again. So very shortly thereafter, the archaeologists that deal with this say maybe within 40 years, they started to collect those bones and put them into ossuaries, bone boxes, and keep them separate. And those arcosolia got deeper, and then these boxes would be slid in, just like drawers in a cabinet or something. And that way, and you'll notice on the ossuary, the inhabitant's name is carved in the stone there, so you could remember which box belonged to which family member. The rolling stone idea, though, is something that's very clear in the archaeology of the time. It is a New Testament concept. None of these go back into the Old Testament period, although they had stones to close the doorways so that the animals couldn't get in and eat grandma. But they didn't have the rolling stone idea with an outer wall to hold it in place. So I gave you this little design in your cutaway on your notes that you can see for yourself what a typical rolling stone tomb might have looked like there. Let's finish then with verses 65 and 66. Pilate said to them, "You have a guard. Go make it as secure as you know how." And they went and made the grave secure. And along with the guard, they set a seal on the stone. So what exactly did they receive here? They secured permission from Pilate. They had to have that. Pilate said. And what does he say? "You have a guard." Now, I suppose that could be understood as, I'll provide for you a guard, so you have a guard. But it doesn't seem to be the way that the grammar is constructed here. I think he's mocking them a little bit. They've just been telling him this guy is a hoax, he's a false Messiah, no way to believe him, and now they're coming and saying, well, what if? And I think he's just kind of dripping with irony here. It would have been doubly problematic for priests to go into the burial ground and set this guard. One of the guys in the Israeli tour guides course that I took was a Kohen, a priest. And as I mentioned before, they can only attend the death of an immediate family member. So as we were moving around all over the country, and especially in Jerusalem, I kind of knew most of the churches and some of who might have been buried somewhere. So I was able to tell him on many times, because their definition of a burial ground is 2 graves or more that have some kind of a fence. Well, you're inside the city wall, so the whole thing has a fence. And if you walk between 2 churches or something where people are buried. So I'm trying to warn him, look, you better not go down that road. Find out where we're going to go, and if you go this way, you can catch up with the group again. Well, one time we were up in the Golan Heights at a Druze village, and it was very interesting. They were giving us all this explanation, and we'd come outdoors again, and we're standing on a flat kind of a rooftop thing looking over into the Golan Heights, and somebody in the group says, "By the way, what is this that we're standing on?" And the guide for us said, "Oh, this is a charnel house." What's a charnel house? Well, that's where you take all the bodies and pile them together inside this big stone house. It's a mass grave. And poor old Chaim, he just kind of jumped like that, like his feet were on something hot, and got off of there as quick as he could. And of course, now he's ritually impure. He has to go have a mikveh, and it's 7 days before he can participate in synagogue prayers and things like that. So think about that in a context like this. Maybe some of those are more recent Jewish traditions, but this was a serious thing for the priest to be talking about going to a cemetery, especially in the middle of High Holy Days. So Pilate says to them, "You make it as secure as you know how." Tomb robbery was and still is a major problem. Today, of course, because of the archaeological artifacts that might be found in there, can be of great value. But tomb robbery, often a family, especially a wealthy family, would bury coins or jewels or personal items with the deceased. William Barclay had a kind of an interesting comment about Pilate's words here. Make it as secure as you know how. Was he saying, keep Christ in the tomb if you can? Now, whether that was his intent or not, I can sure understand a phrase like that, right? Death could not bind him. He couldn't stay in the grave. So it says here they stationed a patrol of priests. They went and made the grave secure. And here they may have some Roman participation, but along with their guard. Now remember, the priests had a temple guard. And they had a variety of different responsibilities within the temple grounds and the gates, the entryways. They easily could have gotten some of these men to form this particular guard. And I read for you earlier, Matthew 28, verses 11. Some of the guard came into the city and reported to the chief priests and all that had happened. Why would they be reporting? Why would Roman soldiers be reporting to the chief priests? And I had to stretch a little bit for this third point, but it's true. They set a patch of paraffin. It says they set a seal on the stone, most likely wax. That was the best form of sealing, whether it was a letter, or document, or something like that. We have a very interesting one on King Tut's tomb. down in Egypt. Now, it's 3,000 years too soon, and it's the wrong guy, and it's Egyptian. But other than that, it's a pretty good little illustration, I'd say. But you can see how in this tomb they stretched the rope there and made it very complicated. And then on the right-hand side there, they used a wax seal. Here's another one that maybe is a better idea of what's going on here. This is actually a Roman wax seal from the 1st century. We don't know if it was on a tomb or not. This turned up in the antiquities market. Somebody was able to peel it off of whatever the original site was carefully. But you can see the Roman eagle and the idea of a secure tomb. So some form of a wax seal. But as we sing in the grand old hymn, death could not keep its prey. So what is the value when we're all done with the burial of Jesus? What is it that makes this really important? We speak about his death, and we know something of the theology involved there, and of course the resurrection, but what about the burial itself? Well, the first is a really straightforward, kind of an explanation. The fact that he's buried means he was dead. You don't bury live people. In fact, you take every precaution not to bury somebody live. So this is a significant detail as a proof that Jesus was genuinely dead. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, as they were preparing the body, no doubt felt for any kind of a pulse, listened carefully, watched for any movement, had their ear down to see if there was any kind of breath. They were not about to bury the Lord alive. So the fact that he's buried is a significant point of evidence, not only for the death, but then, of course, also for the resurrection. It provides some of the background for the false report that circulated that the disciples had stolen the body away. Secondly, his burial is the subject of Scripture. We're not going to have time tonight to look at multiple ones, but I remind you of Isaiah chapter 53, verse 9. He died with the criminals, and he was buried with the rich. And other places that speak about his death also give evidence of the necessity of a burial. Of course, you don't leave a body exposed or out of a tomb. Thirdly, there is a very important theological significance in terms of Christology. This is evidence of his true humanity. He wasn't just a spirit being, just an apparition, God alone. He was fully God and fully man. Otherwise, he couldn't have died. So there's theological significance that has to do with the humanity of Jesus Christ in our Christology. There's also theological significance in baptism, the symbolism that is expressed by baptism. Romans chapter 6, I've said it many times up here in front, it's not about baptism, it's about our union with Christ, but it uses baptism as the symbol, as the picture of it. Just as we are buried with him in baptism, so we rise to newness of life. And that's why we Baptists preach this one hard. Sprinkling or other forms of baptism do not complete that picture. They're faulty. Spirit baptism is being placed into the body of Christ, Acts 2, and water baptism is being placed into the water. And it's based on the theological significance of the death, burial, and resurrection of the Lord Jesus. There is also a great personal significance. You know, it can be too easy, maybe, to talk about this, to hear the descriptions of crucifixion and some of the agonies of the cross and the even greater suffering and pain of being abandoned by the Father because of the sin that he bore for us, and then just kind of walk away and go on your merry way and sort of forget that stuff. A lot of unsaved people do it regularly with impunity. Why should they care? But I'm concerned about me and saved people who maybe don't take it seriously enough. When we stop to think of what is involved in the death, burial, and resurrection of the Son of God, that is utterly amazing. I stand amazed at Jesus the Nazarene, that he could love me, that he could die for me, and wash away my sin. Let's pray. Father, we do want to not rush out of this thought, but to ponder again the great price that was paid, the sacrifice of your Son to redeem us. How grateful we are. And we beg your forgiveness for the many times that we treat it much too lightly and don't really consider the seriousness as we ought. Thank you for recording all of these details in the gospel story. Thank you for giving us 4 different points of view so that we can see it through the eyes of different ones who were there for parts or all of it. Thank you for the wonderful example of the ladies who were the last ones at the cross and the first ones at the empty tomb. Thank you that we can read their eyewitness accounts and know of the truthfulness of this story, the absolute greatest ever. We give you the praise for that with thanksgiving in the name of our dear Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.